It is Tuesday night. That means it's time for Second Look, and we are in the book of Revelation, chapter 8 tonight. Let me kind of lay the groundwork for where we will be headed. And for those here, we have a study guide, and you can kind of tell. We're going to start with a little setup. I called it a little look at the territory as we begin to jump into chapter 8. And then we're going to specifically look at chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. We probably will not get into the judgments, the trumpet judgments, though we will touch on them and what they're all about. But we'll set the stage for all of that and some things that we want to look for. And we're going to drill down on this very odd phrase, silence in heaven, in chapter 8. And we'll be reading that as well. Hey, before we do that, though, just a little leftover from last week that we did not get to, as we were also setting the stage for this chapter 8, and we kind of did a quick review of how John uses the Old Testament. He creates a device, and he is the creator of the device, whereby he borrows bits and pieces, never whole verses, whole passages. He never cites an Old Testament passage, but he is constantly using little bits and pieces, and he puts them together in his own unique fashion, never violating their context, but he does definitely repurpose them. And one of the things I wanted us to see before we move on into chapter 8 tonight is what somebody has called his stylistic use of Old Testament language. Now, this is probably the most technical look back at what John is doing and how he repurposes it. So we won't get super technical here, but what has been noted is that sometimes John uses poor Greek grammar, which is kind of a red flag should go up for this reason, because in his gospel and in the three little letters, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, his grammar is very good. His sentence structure, his syntax, his vocabulary. His grammar is very good, and in fact, it's fairly easy to break into Greek through John. That's why first-year Greek students always start you off in the book of John, because his Greek is very good. He's very precise. He's almost polished in the way he uses first century Greek. Unlike Paul, you never start a first year student out in Paul. It would drive them batty, because Paul is a jumper and a runner, and long sentence structures that go on, and then he goes down this little trail, and then he goes down this trail, and then he brings it back. Or maybe he doesn't, and he misnumbers things. He will say in the middle of one of his letters, finally, brothers and sisters, but he's nowhere near landing the plane. And other times he will say, firstly, but there will be no secondly. So that's Paul. He is a different bird altogether. But John, his language his grammar is usually very, very good. Not usually, always very, very good in the gospel especially, but in his little letters. So that makes what he does here with this stylistic use of his Greek, it's something of note, because he seemingly is doing it on purpose. We know that because there are a lot of mistakes, seeming mistakes. He has more mistakes in grammar mistakes. They seem to be intentional mistakes, because there will be large sections where it's flawless grammar. But he has more mistakes than any other document in the ancient world, which is very strange for him. Again, somebody has said that part of it may be because he writes in Greek, but he thinks in Hebrew, and that may be. But it does, again, seem to be on the deliberate side. Most of the time, he follows the rules of grammar, but when he breaks it, he really intentionally breaks it. Kind of like you will hear speakers, who are fluent people and their grammar is good and their sentence structure and their thinking in paragraphs and all that, which public speakers should aspire to. But then every once in a while, a speaker will say, they'll use the word ain't on purpose, Ain't no way that's going to happen. And they're doing it on purpose, similar to what John's doing here. He uses the bad grammar deliberately. What he is doing with that, or seems to be doing with that, is something very specific. He's telegraphing something specific in the same way that a modern speaker would say, ain't no way that could happen, or some other, poor grammar. It's because they're wanting to express, they want you to notice. And John is doing that on purpose. So his book is littered with mistakes. He's trying to get us to notice something. And you can see how it would affect the way we read the book, the way we interpret the book, if we get it. Oh, when you do something like that, it's on purpose. Look at this, right? And it will help our understanding. But if we don't get that, and we say, what, sloppy grammar, we will probably create an obstacle where none exists. So anyway, I just wanted you to see that. And along the way, we have mentioned some of those. And we will mention more. So there it is. But this week, we're going to look at the territory. We're going into chapter 8, how John uses the Old Testament in chapter 8. We will specifically look at 8, 1 through 6, which is a setup for what's coming on the nations. So let's get into it. Under a little look at the territory, and this is where we're going to kind of set up what happens in chapter 8, actually what happens in chapter 8 and into 9. This chapter is the beginning of the vision of the 6 trumpets. This is where it is. This is where it starts. And the vision of the 6 trumpets, as it says on your study guide, is kicked off with the opening of the 7th and final seal. Remember, there is a legal document that is the focus of what is happening in the throne room scene, in the courtroom scene, in the divine council scene. This document is presented. It's in the hands of the one who sits on the throne. And as the judge, that means this is a legal document. And what you've got here is something that occurs in the Old Testament a few times, and John uses it on purpose, and that is where there has been a covenant violation. And so now, guess what we do? Well, what we do today when there's a breach of contract. What do? We go to court, okay, to settle it. And so that's what's happening here. So here's this legal document in the hands of the one on the throne, and there is some sorrow because we know it's important, and the people in that scene know it's important, and the living creatures know it's important, and the divine beings know it's important, but it is sealed up with 7 seals. It's not readable. It's not presentable. We don't know what comes next. And there is some sorrow around that because there's nobody worthy to open the seals and reveal what's in the document. But along comes a bloodied lamb. And John is told by one of the creatures, don't worry, the lamb is worthy to open the seals and reveal what's in the document, in the legal document. So that's what we're working off here. And we've seen the opening of these 7 seals. And so now what we get here with the vision of the 7 trumpets, it's kicked off with the opening of the 7th and final seal. And it's done by the Lamb. And that is talked about in chapters 5 and 6. So the sequence is kicked off with the first verse in chapter 8, verse 1. where the Lamb is identified of Jesus, of course, in chapter 5 and 6, and is kicked off with the Lamb's opening the seventh final seal on the scroll. So you've got this divine council scene in 4 and 5, and we spent some time talking about that. So you've got 7 seals on this thing. 6 of them are off already. 7th is still there, but you're still not able to open the scroll because you got this one blob of wax that's holding it closed. All right? But once the last seal is broken, we get the 6 trumpets. And these are going to be judgments, all right? We're going to see that these 6 judgments have some very obvious overlap with what happened in Egypt with the plagues. But the scroll isn't opened, your second bullet point here, until all 7 seals are open, of course, only makes sense. Then you get the 7 trumpet judgments. That goes through chapter 9. Actually, 6 of them through 8 and 9. The 7th one will come a little bit later. So, chapters 8 and 9, and this is what's important for kind of looking at where we're going. So chapters 8 and 9 form a unit. It's going to be, they go together interpretively. And as we read through them, it's going to be easy to spot that they definitely belong together, 8 and 9. But what we're going to get in 8 and 9 is some overlap back into the plagues in Egypt. So this first 6 verses kind of serve as a setup for all that. And we're going to see it's very obviously the plagues of Egypt that we're thinking about. So let's take a look at it. Chapter 8, verse 1, and when the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now that sounds odd, what we know about heaven. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God. Okay, this is no small thing now. These 7 divine beings that stand before God, that's their job. Are they throne guardians? We're not sure, but there's some kind of divine being, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Well, that's to be expected from angels. What's their job? Messengers, and trumpets would announce. I mean, think about all those movies, you know, where ba 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 ba, and then the king says something. And another angel came, not one of the 7, and stood at the altar with a golden censer. We've already seen this altar, which is a hook back into the tabernacle temple, the altar of incense. And what did we find was under the altar of incense? Martyrs, those that had been martyred for Christ. And their question is, how long? How long is the judgment going to be delayed? So this is kind of an answer to their question. All right? And so you get this altar and the golden censer. Well, what is the censer? You put incense in it. Well, what is incense? It's the prayers that rise up. You can see why incense, it smells sweet. If you've ever been in a Catholic church, when they wave the censer, it's got a pleasant smell to it, and it rises, doesn't it? So it's a perfect picture of the prayers of the saints. So another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer. Well, what's that tell you? With the prayers of all the saints. So there it spells it out on the golden altar before the throne. Before the throne. Think about the positioning of the altar of incense in the tabernacle, in the temple. It was the thing that sat immediately in front of the mercy seat, the throne, right? Separated only by a curtain. But it was right there, and then you had on the other side of the curtain. So you get the same thing here. Golden altar before the throne, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints. So it's been paralleled here 2 times now. Rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, an earthquake. Verse 6, now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. I think that's about as far as we're probably going to get tonight. So that's the end of the 6th verse, and it starts off then the sequence. So the first thing that we run into here, kind of obvious, there was silence in heaven. There was silence in heaven. So let's think about that for a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, because I think it's significant. I will tell you where I'm, me personally, in my reading and rereading of Revelation, I won't say it's the key, because a lot of Revelation teachers say, oh, I found the key, and I wouldn't pretend to decode it. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's the key, but I do think that the presence of that scroll is really, really significant for understanding this book. It is no small thing. What that scroll is, what it does, what it means when it's unrolled and read, and the things that come out of it. I think the scroll is really, really important in this book, and I think John designed it that way. But there's silence, okay? So what is going on with that? As I said, we're going to look for an obvious overlap with the plagues of Egypt, and that's John's big device on display. He's going to repurpose the plagues of Egypt with these trumpet judgments. But before the trumpet judgments, there's silence in heaven. Well, what is that all about? What's going on there? And there are a number of ways to look at it. And really smart, thoughtful people that have looked at Revelation, they have several different options. You could think of it that way. What we know is that this silence in heaven, the way John's using it, because it's the way he uses everything, it's connected with the Old Testament. All right? So we know that for sure. Scholars, as I said, offer us some options. Let's take a look at 5 options. Okay? Number 1. The first one that we're going to jump into is that the silence is the silencing of prayers. The silencing of worship in heaven. We know a lot of worship goes on in heaven. Isaiah, his vision, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And they never cease to do this, right? These creatures, they never cease to do that in Isaiah. So the first thought is that the silence in heaven, connected to the Old Testament, is that it's the silencing of praise. It's the silencing of worship. It's the silencing of any other prayers, maybe the prayers or petitions that are carried there by divine beings, by angels. They're silenced. The eternal praise is silenced. And why would it be silenced? Well, the idea, this first option, is that the silencing of the praise is so that the suffering saints can be heard. They're under the altar of incense, where the praise goes up, where the incense goes up. And we've already seen the connection that John deliberately makes to prayers of the saints. And we've already seen these saints under the altar waiting, and their question is, how long? How long? And so the thought is that everything goes quiet in heaven so their petition can be heard. So that the prayer of the suffering saints can be heard. Okay? That's an interesting way to think about it. So that would be an enforced silence, not a voluntary silence, so that the prayers of the people suffering on earth don't get drowned out. And you can find that sort of thing in other kinds of apocalyptic literature from roughly the same time, where there are times where there's enforced silence in heaven. It's not an uncommon thing. What else would be going on? I mean, one of the things that commends this is what else would be going on in heaven that would need silencing? Well, they're not sharing recipes. It's praise. So that's what's silenced, okay? And you can kind of see how that would get associated with the incense language. The prayers are going up, the altar of incense mentioned, and the saints under the altar of incense and all of that. So that's one option. There's another option. And you can like these, you can not like these, you can scramble them up. Again, we we don't have the advantage of being in John's day, so we know he's repurposing the Old Testament. There are different ways he may be repurposing it. But here's a different option. And I don't know how you're going to think about this one, but this one might not occur to anybody. And it may not be the most persuasive when you compare it to some of the others. But the idea is that the silence is really about the Lamb. The silence is about the Lamb. Somebody turn to Isaiah 52. And if you're a Bible reader at all, you know that Isaiah 52 is a significant chapter that talks about the Christ to come and who the suffering servant is. That's a very important one. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. We know some of that pretty well. So turn to Isaiah 52, 14 through 15, really. And somebody read that for us, verses 14, verse 15. Who's got it? Go ahead. Okay. Let me read one that's, I don't think it's a printed translation, but it's one that a scholar has come up with. Just as there were many who were astonished at him. In other words, this is the suffering servant from Isaiah 52 that goes into Isaiah 53. So marred was his appearance. We usually take that to mean the humiliation, the beatings, and so on and so on. Again, the Passion of the Christ was faulted for being too graphic. I don't think it was graphic enough. So marred was his appearance beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of mortals. So he shall startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which had not been told them they shall see, and that which they had not heard they shall contemplate. So this option is basically arguing, saying, look, these two verses in Isaiah 52 depict a silencing, but it's a silence of shock and awe in the face of an unexpected discovery. You kind of get that flavor here. In this case, it's the identity of this suffering servant is revealed. And then there's this stunned silence because of it. So what's the cause of the silence in Isaiah 52? Well, it says they were astonished at him. And of course, that's the identity of the Messiah, the Messianic servant that everybody thought was beaten. He was defeated. And it talks about how badly he was beaten and how badly he was humiliated. And so the stunned silence is that he appears here. And that's what does it. The cause for the silence won't be the events that are going to be disclosed in the opening of the scroll and the 7 judgments to follow. And not even the terror of the judgments. That's not what's going to silence people. Because it says the silencing is going to be due to the Lamb in the middle of the throne in Revelation 8. And when people in that scene, they wake up to the fact that the Lamb that was slain is now the holder of power. Well, nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw that coming. And it says, the Lamb in the midst of the throne. Well, what would be the purpose of associating the Lamb with the throne? Well, authority and power. So the slain Lamb now has power, is the way this option works. And when humans see it, and the cosmic world sees it, and the demonic world sees it, and it's held up, and it reveals who God really is, they're at a loss for words. That's what this one is saying. Now, it doesn't specifically in Revelation 8, and here's the problem with this beautiful option, is that it doesn't other than talking about shutting the mouth, there's not any real specific connection here. In other words, there's nothing in the text that would say that connection. It's just a loose association, and it could be that's what causes the silence. Let's take a look at a third option. I don't know about you guys. I think this stuff is very interesting to look at it from different perspectives. But the third option says that the silence signals a return to pre-creation silence. The silence before there was anything. Before there were any little birdies in the treetops to make noise. Or anything, or volcanoes, or the lapping of the waves, or anything. Before there was anything, there was this pre-creation, primordial silence. And it's interesting that in this option, here we're on the cusp of the end time. If you adopt this one, the silence returns. The silence of the chaos returns. And there's something to kind of commend that idea. Although I got to be honest with you, there's nothing in the text that says anything about going back to the silence that predated creation. It doesn't say that. But the idea is that you're going back to the chaos that was before the first creation. All this apocalyptic stuff, plague imagery to follow is going to happen on the earth. It's like the earth is being taken apart. It's being decreated. That's what will happen with these judgments. The earth will be decreated. It'll be taken apart. It'll be destroyed. And so with this destruction, this decreation, you get the silence that came with the thing before creation. So it's kind of in this idea, it's kind of a return. And the idea is that the apocalypse decreates the earth. Let's take a look at option 4. This one is different. And the idea is, well, let's take a look. Let's go about it this way. Take a look in Psalm 62. Somebody else look up Habakkuk 2:20. Habakkuk is one of my favorite books because you get a person arguing with God. And I like that concept very much because I do that. And I try and make deals with God. And sometimes he's not dealing. But anyway, so my sympathies with Habakkuk. In fact, I like Habakkuk so much. When we lived in the St. Louis area, we found a box turtle. And we kept it as a pet. And kids in the neighborhood would come over and play with it. And I named him Habakkuk because I like this book very much. But somebody take a look in Habakkuk 2:20. Somebody in Psalm 62:1. Who's got the psalm? Here's our fourth option. Yeah. And John may be hooking back to something like Psalm 62:1.
Truly my soul finds rest in God, my salvation comes from Him.
Finds rest in God. My soul finds rest in God. Finds quiet in God. How about Habakkuk 2:20? You got it, Karen? Who's got it? This is not a book we turn to a lot. It's not real singable. Go ahead.
That the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.
So what you've got with this one is the idea that it's a liturgical silence. And what I mean by that is, or what they mean by that is, It's like the temple priests. When they went into the temple, almost all of their work was done in silence. Think about it. When you go into the holy place, and especially once a year into the Holy of Holies, you're not going to be real chatty. Right? That's not a place to just, talk. But the fact is, and like Habakkuk here says, they did their work in silence. And there are other places in the Bible, but there are a lot of Second Temple texts that talk about that, where you have the priests in the temple at Jerusalem and they're doing what they do in complete silence. So this option says that the reason, before we get these judgments rolling, as the scroll is broken open and now we can read it, and we're on the cusp of it, that there's this brief stop, this little interlude, where there's this silence. Because that's what you do in the temple. And we know we're in the temple, right? 5 and 6, 4 and 5 chapters. And it says here in 8 that the Lamb is by the throne. So we're still in the throne room. We're still in the presence. You're still in the temple. Remember, the temple is a mock-up of. And so this option says it's fitting that there would be this silence, which is just the way you did business in the temple. Because think about it. Similar things are happening here that happened in the temple. You've got prayers. You've got incense. You've got the presence of an altar. Well, that's all temple stuff. And so it shouldn't be unusual that you get this silence in the temple in heaven. Okay? So that's that idea. Let's take a look at a fifth one, which is also very interesting. Silence was maintained during the offering of the incense and all the other things in the Jerusalem temple. But this fifth one takes it a little bit further. This option is that what we see here is an appalled silence. It's a shock silence. That as the scroll is unrolled and we're beginning to actually move forward in this thing, because think about the progression of the revelation so far. You've had the letters to the churches and that repeated phrase, I have this against you. Repent. If you do, you're an overcomer. And then overcomers get something that is part of the uniform of the holy ones. A robe, a crown, a scepter, a throne, right? If you overcome. Well, then we get in chapter 4, you get the presence of the holy ones seated on thrones. So we came through the judgment. We made it. Goal! Right? We're there in the divine council along with living creatures and divine beings. You get human beings. You get the redeemed. So we made it. The church made it. But now, in the progression of the revelation, you get judgment on the nations. Most especially for the way they've treated the saints, the holy ones. Okay? Not exclusively, but largely. That's why you get the holy ones under the altar saying, how long? How long? So with this one, it's an appalled silence. It's a shock silence. Take a look. There's several verses here. Isaiah 47, Ezekiel 27. If you're watching online, Isaiah 47:5, Ezekiel 27:32, Amos 8:2-3, Lamentations, a book by Jeremiah that we don't go to very often, but Lamentations 2, verses 10 and 11. Then we're going to look at a couple of others. But these are all pointing to that idea that the silence is an appalled silence. It's a silence of shock. Isaiah 47:5. Who's got that? Go ahead.
Sit in silence, go into darkness, queen city of the Babylonians. No more will you be called queen of kingdoms.
Very often, and we're going to see just a few of the cases, the Old Testament associates silence with divine judgment. Psalm 115, verse 17, it's not on your list, but in that verse, idolaters who die, they pass away, they live in silence. They live in silence. Part of the judgment is silence. And those who persecute God's people are judged by God, and they sit in silence in Sheol, in the grave. Psalm 31:17 talks about that. But this one is kind of unique, this Isaiah 47:5, because what you've got here is Babylon and Israel are silent because of God's judgment against both of them. Not just Babylon, but Israel. And both are silenced because of. So here, that's a historical instance where there was silence because of judgment. Another one, Ezekiel 27:32. Who's got that one?
As they wail and mourn over you, they will take up a lament concerning you. Who was ever silenced by Tyre, surrounded by the sea? By the sea.
There we go. Take a look in Amos. Got a minor prophet that says similar thing. Amos 8:2-3.
What do you see, Amos? He asked. I replied, a basket full of ripe fruit. Then the Lord said, like this fruit, Israel is ripe for punishment. I will not delay their punishment again.
And 3.
In that day, the singing in the temple will turn to wailing. Dead bodies will be scattered everywhere. They will be carried out of the city in silence. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken.
So there you get a temple scene where there's silence as part of the judgment. They're not allowed to speak. They're silenced. Last one, Lamentations, as I said, by Jeremiah, but it's a part of what he has to say that we don't go to very often. Lamentations 2:10-11. It's right after Jeremiah.
Leaders of beautiful Jerusalem sit on the ground in silence. They are clothed in burlap and throw dust on their heads. The young women of Jerusalem hang their heads in shame.
Okay, so throwing dust on their heads, sitting in this rough clothing. Tino talked about sackcloth on Sunday. What's that indicative of? Well, mourning, guilt, seeking repentance, confession, all of that. But part of it is that for these leaders seated on the ground, they're instructed, keep silent. Don't talk. You've got nothing to say here. Don't say anything. So silence. So the earth the earth, leaders, guilty people, Israel, Babylon, all silent as part of their judgment. So the idea with this option is that when you see this silence in heaven, it's an appalled silence, it's a shocked silence. And John may be hooking back to some of these ideas where you see that silence as part of judgment in the Old Testament. Not unusual at all. We already looked at Habakkuk 2, verse 20. Take a look in Zechariah, chapter 2, verse 13, because you see this especially in those two verses, in the Habakkuk 2:20 that we looked at, but also in Zechariah 2:13. So somebody read that 2:13 for us from Zechariah. You got it, JR?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I said, if a person defiled by contact with a dead body touches one of these things, does it become defiled? Yes, the priest replied, it becomes defiled.
Maybe I gave you the wrong reference.
2:13.
Yeah.
Be silent.
Does it say that?
Well, that's what mine says.
Okay.
In the New Living Translation. Be silent before the Lord, all humanity, for he is springing into action from his holy dwelling.
Wow. So that's not just Babylon. That's not just Israel. That's not just bad people. It's not just dead people. It's all people. Everybody, all flesh. Keep silent. So those two are especially relevant, where the Lord is pictured in his holy temple, just like we've got in Revelation 8, and the command is be silent. Now, as we kind of start to wrap this up, we're going to connect back to some things that we've been working on for a long time and you're most familiar with. What you've got in this option, and I think this is probably the preferred option. I only say that because and we only looked at a few, but there's more text that point to the idea of an appalled silence, of a shocked silence, than there are some of the others, as good as they are. So what you've got here is all the earth, all flesh stand in silent awe. That's what's happening in Revelation 8. As the scroll is finally opened with the breaking of the last seal, and when the plan is seen, it's like you're in awe. Not only at how destructive some of it is, how it's a decreation, right? But also, it's more than that. We will, and as we move into this, we're going to deal with this more and more. A lot of people see the book of Revelation, especially Jesus' role in it, as retribution. I'm not sure that's what it is entirely. And we'll poke around at that in the weeks to come. I think there is this silence, this awe, when the final plan is recognized. And we see what Jesus is really up to. It's not just retribution. In fact, he may not be the one bringing the retribution. The violence may not be his. And when that plan is finally laid out, it's like, oh my gosh, nobody saw that coming. It's more beautiful, it's more intricate, it's more detailed, it's more comprehensive. It connects all the dots better. It pushes all the buttons. It solves all the problems. It answers all the riddles. It does everything when that last seal is broken off the scroll. And that is why I say the scroll is really a main focal point here in trying to figure out what John is doing, what he's done with this scroll, and the care he's taken with the snap off one, snap off another, snap. And it's like, get to it, get to it, get to it. Well, now we're to it. And when they see it, divine beings, human beings, living creatures, everything is silent. So I think this last one, this appalled silence, this silence of awe, is the thing. Take a look at a couple more verses, and then we're gonna see what happens here that really comes out of the blue. Isaiah 23, verse 2, and then same book, Isaiah 41, verses 1 through 5. Somebody read that, Isaiah 23 for us.
Mourn in silence, you people of the coast, and you merchants of Sidon. Your traders have crossed the sea, sailing over deep waters.
Take a look in 41, 1 through 5.
Be silent before me, you islands. Let the nations renew their strength. Let them come forward and speak. Let us meet together at the place of judgment. Who has stirred up one from the east, calling him in righteousness to his service? He hands nations over to him and subdues kings before him. He turns them to dust with his sword, to windblown chaff with his bow. He pursues them and moves on unscathed by a path his feet have not traveled before. Who has done this and carried it through, calling forth the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, with the first of them and with the last, I am he. The islands have seen it and fear. The ends of the earth tremble. They approach and come forward.
Ends of the earth, nations, kings. It's pretty comprehensive what's going on here. And the silence at the beginning of it. Listen to me in silence. I bring these two passages up because these are deliberate references back to what's known as the Song of Moses. The Song of Moses. Do you know what chapter the Song of Moses is in? Deuteronomy 32. Which is our seminal chapter for the idea that the original plan was that Yahweh would have these Elohim that would assist him in administering the world, and maybe more than the world, but certainly nations. And that different nations were allotted to different divine beings, but Psalm 82, they bungled it badly. They abused their power. But in Deuteronomy 32, the nations are allotted to the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, these divine beings. But what does he say about one nation in particular? But Jacob will be my inheritance. That's why we get the saga in the Old Testament that we get, because he's going to restore everything through this one nation, who don't always do so good themselves. In fact, they become a very bad son of God. But a son will arise who will get it right. You see? And bring everything, reconcile everything. So it's kind of interesting that in our discussion about this silence, this appalled silence, this silence of shock and awe, that when Isaiah talks about it, he hooks back into the Song of Moses, which is where everything starts. Where everything starts. And here, everything is coming to a conclusion. But before we go, as I said at the bottom, catch this. Don't miss this. The contents of the now open scroll. Again, I think the scroll is very significant for us. But the contents of the now open scroll, it makes up everything from Revelation 8, verse 2, all the way through Revelation 22, verse 5. What's contained in that scroll will unroll through the rest of the book. So the silence happens before the day of the Lord. And we've talked about that concept. Before judgment, before the final apocalypse, you get this silence. And then it happens. Then it happens. But as I say, I hope one of the things we'll be able to do in the weeks to come is to see that what unfolds and Jesus' part in it is more than just retribution. It's way more than that. And I think John is throwing us some hints. He's throwing us some hints. And unless we take the time to run some of it down and see how he repurposes the Old Testament, we will miss those hints. Which is something that the people that got this originally, they didn't miss. So we got to kind of go back and think like them, you see? Not be informed by our creeds and our theologies and our take and our history and were they thinking? And what was John thinking? So, anyway. So we'll leave it there. So we will let the people that are watching online, we will let you go. And we'll be back next week. So we'll see you.